Welcome. My name is Kelly Riordan. I'm a classical musician turned creative entrepreneur, and this is the best platform for musicians that are looking to shape their career by thinking outside the box. Eric, thank you so much for being here today. I am stoked for this interview. We've been talking about it for way too long, so I really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks for having me here. I'm happy to be here too.
Yeah, awesome. Well, as always, I want to start at the beginning of your career story, which I'm assuming probably started at a pretty young age in your musical journey. What did that look like when you were a child? Where did you start lessons?
Oh, it's actually pretty interesting in that I didn't start playing classical music till I was 18. I grew up in
Oh,
a very rural part of Virginia. I grew up in a log cabin on the Shenandoah River. It was very beautiful.
gosh.
And my grandfather was the band director and a concert classical pianist. He was really
Mm.
amazing for this local community, kind of like out of a Norman Rockwell painting or something, right? You could imagine
Oh,
like one of those.
yeah.
And anyway, he had fabulous style, but my dad was a serial entrepreneur and had
Mm.
moved into the middle of nowhere bought this little mountain. And so I truly grew up in a log cabin, but it was a beautiful spot. And I grew up playing a ton of guitar. Guitar was my thing that I
Mm.
always wanted to do. But I was a rock player and blues and folk, growing up in a rural area. And so I had a lot of fun doing that. And I was really serious. It was like during the era of shred, and those those early 90s before grunge came out. It was really cool to practice all day long. Right. And so,
Yeah.
spandex and big hair era, that was what I looked up to. And I thought that was so cool. But then when I went to music school, I knew that I wanted to study guitar, and so I auditioned for a music program. But I didn't know how to read at all, so I had good
Mm.
hands, and I listened to a lot of classical music, but I didn't know how to play it at all. I came from a family of it, and so I started playing classical guitar my freshman year of college, and it
Wow.
was amazing because I was so immersed in it. I loved it so much,
Mm.
but it wasn't until maybe a decade later that I just had this realization that I'd started too late playing a classical instrument. I wanted to be a concert classical guitar player. I wanted to win competitions. I wanted to concertize. That was my dream. But what did happen is I became an amazing teacher and studio
Mm.
player because I was basically learning how to play classical music as an adult. And so that was the skill set I got. And one day, a great teacher of mine who I was in Seattle studying with was like, I know you want to win the GFA, the Guitar Foundation of America competition, but it's like, you started at 18 and you're doing great, but like it's going to be really hard to do that. And he just
Mm.
leveled with me, and I was actually grateful for it, right? Because I was like, oh, I need to pivot. That's not going to probably happen
Yeah.
this go around. So I actually started playing guitar classical much later.
Wow.
Mhm.
I'm wondering, so you're growing up in the log cabin. Were your parents musical? Were they also jamming with you? Was that like a family event, or was that something that you were kind of doing independently as a child?
No, what's interesting, my grandfather was a musician,
Mhm.
but my parents really, they both played instruments. My dad went to Virginia Tech and was in the marching band there, and my mom played
Nice.
clarinet, but
Yeah.
it wasn't part of our day-to-day life.
Mm.
Growing up, there wasn't actually a whole lot of music in the house. I was crazy about music from a really young age. I got that bug, but no, the cool thing is they were super encouraging about it. My dad was a
Yeah.
business person, and when I was really interested in music, and actually voice was my first instrument in high school. I loved doing musical theater and all that, show choir and stuff. When I really had an affinity toward that and playing guitar, they were super supportive because he had grown
Mm.
up in a musical household, so it wasn't necessarily his trip, but they were super encouraging, right? But they also encouraged me to get a business degree too. They're like, might
Mm.
be good to study music and business, which I'm glad I learned both.
Yeah, that has paid off a little bit in your career, hasn't it? Just a smidge. That's awesome. Now, when you were growing up, were you taking lessons pretty regularly, or were you mostly self-taught, or was it your grandfather that was teaching you often?
No, I took lessons. I took
Okay.
lessons from my first guitar teacher taught out of a battery warehouse in downtown Broadway, and pallets of car batteries everywhere. He had a little corner there, and he was a really nice person and a local musician. He played organ at my sister's wedding,
Mm.
and so yes, I studied with him for a while. But I think I started lessons. I was playing 3 to 5 hours a day. I've always been I love practicing, love
Mm.
improving. And even at a young age in seventh grade, when I started playing, I was super into it. And so I went through kind of a series of guitar teachers in that local area until I went to music school. And then I kind
Mm.
of found my first professor.
That's awesome. So when
Mhm.
you got to music school, was it, I mean, you're describing it like it was something that obviously was a big challenge, but you were super into, and so maybe it wasn't scary, but did it feel ever like you were out of your element, or that, I don't know, maybe
Oh,
you made
yeah.
this big decision and it wasn't the right one? Any of those feelings kind of creep in?
Gosh, that's a really personal and awesome question. Yeah, yeah, I might cry a little bit. No, it's I definitely realized when I went to music school and was hanging out with other people that had grown up around, more educational opportunities about that
Mm.
I did feel a little bit out of place, and especially as a guitar player, we're a little bit of a somewhat outcast in the classical musical world because so much of what we do is solo and so little of it's
Yeah.
ensemble. And our ensembles are usually guitar ensemble. We don't get to do
Yeah.
all right. So, um, but yeah, so I did feel that, and I think, but
Mm.
I really loved it. I was really interested in the Spanish tradition of music. Discovered Bach, which was like just blown. That's so great on guitar, right? And that's such a wonderful avenue to go down. So I think that yeah, I felt as an outcast, but I also knew I was in kind of the right place where I wanted to be.
Mm.
And I was super interested, like when you're in life and you're curious about something and you're all in, you don't really care that you're a dork. You're like, oh man, it's cool. I'm really I'm enjoying this process.
Well, and when you're sitting in the practice room every day too, you're kind of out of touch with the outside world in a good way and isolated in a good way at that point to kind of protect yourself and give yourself the space that you needed probably to make the gains that had to happen.
Yeah, I think I enjoyed practicing more than I even enjoyed performing when it came to, I just
Mm,
really loved reading scores and trying to get inside the head of composer. I mean, and I could do it 6, 8 hours a day and
that's
be really
awesome.
happy doing that. I
Mm,
love going into that cave. I'm a super extroverted person in most ways, but that I just love practicing, and I always have.
mm. Do you feel like when you were in school, because from what I'm hearing, I think it was a double major then, music and business, correct?
Yeah, it was under basically I had a minor in business. It was called music
Okay,
industry.
got
It's
it.
like North American. There's a NAMBI affiliation, which is a North
Okay,
American Music Business Institutes, and the school I went to had a really strong program for that. So
nice.
it was a music degree with a concentration in business.
That's awesome. Did you
Mhm.
feel like in school it was complementing itself well, or did you ever feel like you were torn in too many different directions?
No, I didn't feel that torn. I don't really think like so many kids in school, I didn't really have any idea what was coming in life, right? I really
Yeah.
assumed I'd probably
Yeah.
be famous, right? I like that just seemed like it would make a ton of sense, or I couldn't imagine I was ever really gonna have to work, and I
Yeah.
always
You're
knew
gonna be
that,
wearing spandex. That was the vision.
by that time it was grunge, so it'd be more of, wearing a flannel shirt, maybe, it shifted quickly. I was always very
It's a relief. That's a relief.
beholden to the fashion of the day. Um, so yeah, but no, I think it was a good
Mm,
experience. But I mean, honestly, the truth is I don't think I really started learning
mm,
well until, that whole idea. What I used to be able to do in 5 or 7 hours of learning, I can do in an hour and a half of great
mhm,
focus practice now. As we learn how to become more efficient, and we learn these different models for how our brains work. So I think I didn't really discover learning and curiosity and intensity until I got
mm,
out of school, right?
mm.
And so and I think that's an interesting. That's why I love teaching so much, is because I was a student of life a little bit later than a lot of my contemporaries.
Yeah. Yeah. So after graduation, well, maybe a little bit before, nearing graduation, what was the vision at that point? As the real world is setting in, what were you seeing for the next few steps?
Ooh, well, gosh, that's a really good question. I was sitting in a history class my senior year of college right before spring break, and I realized I didn't really want to go on a ski trip with some friends. And I was sitting next to a really cool person, and I opened up this history book and I kind of put a pin down, and it hit Seattle, Washington. And I was like, that's interesting. So I knew that there was a great teacher out here at University of Washington I often wanted to study with. So I called them or whatever, even text back then, or sent an email or something. And I booked my last spring break to come out here, and I stayed in a hostel. And I decided, okay, cool. I met the teacher and I thought it'd be awesome. And I decided, hey, after graduation, I'm going to just move to Seattle for the summer and see what happens.
Hmm.
And so graduated college, jumped in the car, grabbed my dog, packed up some guitars, drove to Seattle, and really fell in love with it. Fell in love with the Pacific Northwest, fell in love with being an urban environment, coffee shop culture,
Mm.
really hyper intellectual people everywhere. And I was so confused because I'd never been around so many people that were that I felt really like I wanted to be around them. I was blown away by all the art. And then I started work. I got some really cool jobs where I was working for Seattle Symphony, Seattle Opera, doing fundraising or marketing for them, and started to meet really cool people and playing music, and really realized I probably wasn't going back. And
Mm.
then I met my now wife, who was an actor. And so I really felt alive. Right. And I realized that a lot of the things that, truthfully, being a young dude growing up in a really, really rural place, I had personality traits that I didn't want to carry. Right. And I was
Mm.
meeting people that I was like, oh, I can see the world in a different way.
Mm.
And it really, that's where I feel like I'm just so grateful for that experience. So it was definitely transformative. And
Wow.
then everything else just kind of unfolded. I was in the right place. And then everything past that moment just started clicking. Right. I met
Wow.
my best friend, who's now my best friend. And, he was a professional tennis player. And so this was actually really cool. He was going to University of Washington. He was the captain of the tennis team. And he took a big interest in my guitar playing because he's like, man, this is weird. We're doing like this. There's a book called The Inner Game of Tennis that
Yeah,
most
yeah.
musicians will read at some point. And we were just talking about this training and the competitive nature of it. And he would start coming to me to get these guitar competitions. I'm sure they have these for every instrument. You like go to universities for like 20 people compete for like $500. It's terrible. You play a terrible set piece and you're like, but he would start come with me and give me and do mental training with me because he thought it was fun. So we'd drive to Montana and do these things. So it was a really a beautiful time, naturally unfolding. No one has ever asked me any of these questions though. So I appreciate you doing it. These have all been
Oh my
sealed in
gosh.
the vault for
That's
20
so
years.
cool though to it's so cool to find someone like that though that you click with and you've got that similar mindset and you're feeling really aligned. And it is kind of wild because I think music if you go on a little tangent about like societal expectations and the whole starving artist musician trope, there is that mindset that like musicians are somehow less than, or like the training that we have is not really that important, it must not be that intensive, like you're to deliver pizzas, all that stuff. But from it sounds like from what you're describing, pretty soon after graduation we hit the ground running and we had a really strong career and you were making it work right away. So to have someone recognize that and to affirm that and want to support you and work together and growing, that probably felt really good in a friend.
Oh yeah, and music's really hard. Like reaching a high
Yeah.
level of music is really hard. It takes an incredible amount of intensity, focus, discipline, intelligence, curiosity. And
Yep.
so, you actually can have really meaningful conversations with lawyers and surgeons because they've done similar paths in their
Yeah.
towards their curiosity. You have so much more in common with them than you think, right? And so then they
Oh
start
yeah.
becoming your clients. And then, and I have a lot of friends are doctors and professional athletes, which is an interesting
Mm.
thing that over the years I've really connected with those two worlds. And many close friends play sports at a high level because it's so similar, that intensity and that it's movement creativity, right, where we're creating sound. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
That is awesome. I want to back up a second because you said you got jobs right away with like Seattle Symphony and Seattle Opera. How did that come to pass? How are you finding those opportunities? I'm thinking maybe someone's listening right now and they're currently a student and they're trying to figure out what the heck happens after their performance degree. How did you find your way into those organizations?
Oh, sure. That's a great question. I'd moved out here, had a little bit of cash, and I had two job opportunities. One of them, I had got a job offer to be a manager at a guitar center that had just opened, which I was not a big fan of Guitar Center. I never really had been, but it was a career path that could be cool. And the other was I had signed up to be a telemarketer for the Seattle Symphony. And most of
Mm,
these symphony rooms will have like what they call subscribers, they call ticket holders. They'll ask them to give, they'll ask them to buy season tickets next year. And I loved it. And I met another mentor there who I decided to take this job because it was 20 hours a week, so I could still practice. I was living on the floor. I'd rented a room from a former Seattle Seahawk, another one of these I'd run into on my first trip out here. So I had a place to stay, and I had a mentor that taught me how to sell. And I was on my first
Mm.
day there, and he started teach. He was an artist, and he taught me how to sell things, and I was really good at it. And I would take my guitar into the phone room, and I'd call a donor, and I'd be like, "Look, what if I play this part from the Concerto de Aranjuez? I'll play this little Rodrigo thing." And they'd be like, "Oh my gosh, this guy can play, and he's calling me for tickets." And they'd give me money. So I ended up making a lot of money doing that for the summer, and I was working 20 hours a week, and that opened up the doors where I started managing different marketing campaigns and then moving into other spots. And I started bouncing around where I would go do a fundraiser for Seattle Symphony or go over to Seattle Repertory Theater, which where I met my wife. And I learned these skills of marketing and development that I didn't want to commit to into a full-time gig. I knew that, but it was a great way to learn the space. And I was in Seattle. It was right around the time our new symphony hall opened.
Mm.
And I got this, I was one of the first people that I was friends with the security guard at Benaroya Hall, and he let me go play on the stage and practice, and got to be really a part of that scene here in Seattle. Got to see Yo-Yo Ma open up the symphony hall. So it was really a cool time.
Summer ends and you've been working these part-time jobs. What happened in the fall? Were you still working kind of a conglomeration of positions, or
Well,
were you
yeah,
moving
that,
into
that kind
teaching
of,
at
that
that
kind of,
point?
well, I started teaching at a really fabulous local music school, and really, and
Okay.
instantly fell in love with it. Like once I started teaching, I was
Mm.
like, oh man, one of the first kids I ever taught is now like one of the principal bass players for Seattle Symphony. Like, so it's a very
Oh my
cool
gosh.
road. Yeah. So I had a really great fortune of running into really fabulous, the perfect clients, people that were really
Yeah.
awesome and cultured and really excited. Because one of the things that I think is really important is that a young musician has a lot of energy. We're not jaded yet. So we're perfect to teach young people music, right? And so it's almost an advantage. And I really capitalized on that. I really started loving teaching, decided I was going to stay in Seattle, fell in love, all the things. And so that kind of became my journey of, I love teaching so much that, I wrote a book and I opened my own studio when I realized that, at, I guess I'd been doing that for a period of time, a couple of years, that I went out and opened my own space and decided that was what I was going to do for a while, is be a guitar
Mm.
player, do session work, and have a teaching studio. Yeah, it was a natural occurrence where I started working for a local music store that was connected to a little school, and ran into some great students and families, and they started really encouraging me to do more of it. And I loved it. I realized, oh, this
Mm.
is something I really love to do. I love performing. I love teaching. That's where I kind of discovered I had that gift that my grandfather had. I was really
Mm.
into developing young people.
That's awesome. And
Mhm.
along the way too, I mean, you started working with another studio, but at some point you went independent. How did you make that decision? What were some of the factors that kind of came into play there?
Oh, I always thought that at some point I'd either go get a law degree or an MBA. Like I
Mm.
always thought that'd be something that was going to happen, is that I'd be a musician, I'd partner it with a law degree or an MBA. But I also really loved teaching and playing music, and I was making a good living doing it. But to make a real living doing it, I needed to go on my own, right? And so
Yeah.
I needed to do my own thing. And so it was really, I had a great talk with the owner of the school, was a really great friend and mentor, and he sent me on my way. He openly gave me the students to take with me. Really, I'd
Wow.
been there a couple of years at that point, and so I realized that was the path I needed to take, and it was really successful. And I was able to suddenly be like, wow, I'm making a really good living now, playing music and teaching guitar and having a really good life.
Mm.
So, and my wife was an actor, so we were working this thing out together, having a great time, and it was really fulfilling.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, and to again have a partner. We talked about your friend earlier, but to have a partner that's living a similar life and knows the struggles, if you will, and also all the wonderful things that come with having a life in the arts and being in education and sharing that. That's really exciting.
Oh my gosh, and being an actor is so much harder. Like, you think being a
Mm.
musician's hard, like the amount of just straight up dismissal you get
Yeah.
and rejection you get. Like the
Oh yeah.
you have you're if you get closed 10 or 15% of your auditions, you're lucky, and you're always out there grinding. And so it was really great to support each other, and great to see another artist in another milieu what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I am curious. So we start teaching independently. At some point, Fonz comes along, and you have this development idea. And I'm wondering how that happened. Was it something that you were just looking for your own studio? Is it something that had been a long idea that you had been considering for a long time? What did that look like, and how did you come up with the thought and the idea in that process?
So over the course of the next 10 years, a lot had happened, right? And
Okay.
so this is from 2006 to 2016. I was really doing well as a music teacher,
Yeah.
and it was my daughter was born in 2006. And that's when that whole story of when I doubled my rates and started making whatever, doing really well, buying a house in Seattle. That next decade was amazing. It was kind of the
Mm,
zenith of my teaching career. But, around 2015, I started thinking I'm ready for something new. I've been
mm,
teaching 30 to 50 students a week. My wife is running my school at this point, and she's an assassin. And so she does all the invoicing, all the billing, creates these beautiful, she's managing these relationships, and all these families that I work with, we're family. Like
mm.
they're my daughter's babysitter. One of my students taught Edie how to play guitar when she was little. I did not.
Oh,
This is an interconnected community, where everyone knew each other. I do these big guitar barbecues, and everyone would show up, and
guitar
we'd do
BQ.
camps together, and I'd take
Guitar
them to the
pictures.
mountains to,
I love that.
yeah.
Sorry,
And
that
so
is awesome. Oh
we
my
had this
gosh.
really beautiful thing going where it was a
Oh,
truly fabulous community of, people in the wings, little cousins coming up,
yeah.
waiting to study with me. And it was
Mm,
gorgeous. But my wife was spending 10, 15 hours a week running the school. Right.
mm,
And it was a lot of work for her, but it was super efficient. And I started saying, okay, I'm ready to do something else. Maybe I'm going to do this MBA. Maybe I'm going to go to law school. Uh, I just did the thing, and I encourage everybody to just ask the universe and say, I'm going to pay
mm,
attention, but like, universe, I kind of need something to do here. And it sounds so cheesy, but every time you do it, it really works. You're like,
yeah.
I need a sign. And so I'm in Seattle. It's a tech hub, and I got connected, through various means with someone who is an absolute household name in Silicon Valley, right? And had recently exited one of their startups, and was looking to do another one, and was really interested in be like, wait, how long does it take Allison to do this? And he's
Mm,
like, hmm. So next thing you know, I mean, and this is late 2015. I did not know what UX meant. I didn't know what a tech stack was. I didn't know anything, but I suddenly was surrounded by this team of UX designers, engineers sitting in a room, and they were analyzing what it took to run a music
mm,
studio. And I was like, cool, I want to build something like just does invoices like we do. And they're like, okay, we can do a lot better than this.
mm,
So we researched the idea of creating an automated system to run a teaching business. And then we studied what personal trainers do. And we realized, oh, wait, there's nothing that's doing this the way that we think could be
mm,
done. And so I co-founded Fonz, with a great investor and a co-founder who was incredible, and took me under their wing and taught me everything, let me make a lot of big
mm,
mistakes. And so we launched our first version of this platform. I think I was our first customer in 2016, right? That was when it first launched. So that was the creation and the genesis story. And it was just basically right time, right place, happened to have, the idea. And the really interesting thing is everything that I knew about running a studio that I thought was just going to be perfect, I was so wrong about so much of it. When you started to
mm,
apply, I had to eat a lot of crow or whatever they call it. I had to really step back because there was a lot of things that I wasn't doing the most efficient way
mm,
or the most mindful way for the myself and for the people that I was serving. So it was a great
mm.
experience.
What's interesting is you're describing the community in your studio, making the shift to running the studio in a more automated way, and bringing in this new idea and this new platform and trying to reiterate on that. I'm sure, as many teachers struggle with, I'm sure there was a part of you that was overly lenient with a lot of your students. Like, the studio is doing great and we love everyone that we're working with, so we'll just like set that policy aside for a little while, or I'll make up every single lesson you need to, or I'll just cancel that lesson and refund you, not a big deal. It probably caused a lot of conflict internally when you're making these shifts too.
That is a very astute point, which is, we had families that went through divorces, so we didn't invoice
Yeah.
them for 6 months. And these are wealthy families,
Mm,
and so that was one of the things is these people went through our books and they're like, wait, you have $7,000 in outstanding invoices. And we're like, but we make a lot of money. And they're like, you don't, the invoicing isn't going to work anymore because
yeah.
no one wants this. And so, when Fonz was first released, it was basically a per appointment, like an Uber. That was the
Mm,
first billing model that we automated to try, which is that you come to your lesson, the system automates your cancellation policy. If you blow it off, I'm going to bill you anyway. And we went from my wife working like 15 hours a week to just, she went and got another job. She's off doing another thing. I was
yeah.
running the studio myself in 20 or 30 minutes a week. And we had after 6 months, we had $0 outstanding. And
Mm,
so we were like, okay, we're really on to something with what you're saying, which is that a system can play bad cop. It's be like, dude, you
yes.
got the text that said your lesson was today and you still didn't come. You try to cancel it and the system goes, I'm sorry, but Kelly's going to still bill you. I never even knew it, but I didn't feel guilty about it. And I knew that I hated sitting in the studio and talking about money around kids.
Yeah.
I felt so gross with a parent be like, hey, I'm so sorry. Did you bring your check? Because it dumbed down the lesson. It took the magic out of this time we had together teaching music and playing music. And now it's like, it's transactional. Like, really, I just want
Yeah.
your mom to pay me. And so for me, the most important thing was taking music out of the studio, right? Or taking money out of the studio. And then the second most important thing was automating all those awkward relationships,
Mm,
my cancellation policy. And then what I learned is that students, customers, they learn so quickly. They just want consistency, right? If
yep.
you charge a flat rate billing every month and they miss 2 lessons, they don't care. They're like, oh, that's what it is. I guess I had to go. If there is a financial crisis, which almost never happens, but when it does, you can do what you said and be like, oh my
Yes.
gosh, let me bend over backwards to come
Yep.
and do this thing for you. But it almost never happens. So
Hmm.
it was really a
Well, and
process of kind of, reinventing.
yeah, and the confidence, not even confidence, but like the guts it takes to come to a service provider, like a private lesson teacher, and say, we are in dire financial straits and we do need support from you, or we're going to have to pause lessons. That's a big deal. And so when someone's coming to you at that point, it is significant. They're not coming to you with little minor things. They're going to make it work for everything else. So at that point, like, yeah, over COVID, I had students that I taught pro bono for months at a time because it's not their fault their parents got laid off from their jobs. The world is burning. Of course, we're going to deal with that. But it's important to provide that leniency where we can, and also have everyone else that can't afford to pay a full competitive rate for your services be supporting you financially so you can help those students that need that extra hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know it when there's someone working you for a deal because that's how
Oh,
they're
yeah.
they're wired. I interviewed a CFO for a major. I'd Googled them. You always Google them before they come in. I'm like, this is the CFO for like one of the major health insurance companies in the country.
Mm,
And they're like trying to work me for the price. Now I was like, "Man, I'm not teaching you. Like, I know what this is about. Like, and that's different because it takes so
yeah.
much heart to say, we're going through a hard time. Can we work together?
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a very different thing. And you want
Yeah.
to, you want to do what you can.
Well, and it's important to know who those perfect clients are for you, those ideal students, so that you know when you're willing to give.
Mm-hmm.
It's not everyone is someone that you want to help in that way. Not that if a student's in a particular pickle financially, we don't want to support them always. But sometimes if it's a difficult student to work with and they come to you and they say they'd rather take some time off, we're like, yeah, that sounds great. Like maybe we'll touch base in a few months. That sounds nice.
Yeah.
Bye. But when it's someone that you really care about, then like absolutely, we have a good connection in lessons. We're engaged. The student really cares about the music. We're on the same vibe. So of course, I'm going to do anything and everything that I can to make that work for you. That feels so much more natural at that point. It doesn't feel contrived or forced.
Yeah. And you've got a community. Like it's a real
Yeah.
thing.
Yep.
Like where, when uh, something happens to one person, everybody it cares,
Mm,
and the community starts getting tendrils and tentacles into each other, right? Where
yeah.
your students know each other, they jam together, they do shows
Yep.
together. Yeah, so it's a virtuous cycle for sure.
You're talking a lot about the community in your studio, and I just had this like thought back to the beginning where we were talking about your music schooling and how sometimes being a guitarist in music school felt a little bit more isolating and lonely. How did those feelings impact this desire for you to have a community around the studio? Was it something you did consciously, or did it just kind of happen?
I think it just happened. Yeah, I mean,
Mm,
maybe there was something. That's a great question. Maybe there's something that popped up. But what I realized is a business model, which sounds gross, but it's true, is like the creating authentic connections between people
yeah.
is what is the glue. Right? It's the
Mm,
carbon fiber. It's so solid because everyone every connection that you make, that is the lacking of the digital age, right? Is we have
yeah.
all this
Oh, yeah.
access and less real connection. And so music is a way that, more than music, you can have people being together, making, organic sounds together, and listening to each other and communicating and improvising or playing ensembles together. And that's the pitch, right? You're like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, your kid spends all day wanting to play video games. Why don't we get him out here in a band, or like get him in an ensemble playing music? And parents are just like,
Yeah.
tink, 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 all in.
Well, and it is a lot more fun because there's a little bit of positive peer pressure. Like now we're not just creating and improving for ourselves, but like when you put a kid in an ensemble, like I think about my students that are in youth orchestra and how much they love that environment because yes, they have all their friends there, but also there's that tiny bit of friendly competition. Like we're really good friends, and also next seating assignments, I really want to kick your butt. I really want to get the
Yeah.
chair ahead of you or several. And that little bit of positive pressure where they're friendly and they know what the other ones are doing and what they're trying to work on. It really breeds for some students. It's not a fit for everyone, of course, but for the right student, that can really yield faster, better, more enjoyable results.
Yeah. And positive results.
Yeah.
Kids like that. Kids
Yeah.
like knowing where they stand. Kids
Yep.
like our kids at a young age can work towards things,
Hmm.
right? And this is where I think as adults we get things really messed up. And music's a great area. Sports is a great area, but that's healthy for kids. That creates
Yeah.
real community, right?
Yep.
If you and I are sitting next to each other and swapping, even though it might be really annoying that you got my seat, and I'm also motivated to get your seat back or to
Yep.
cede that seat to you and be like, oh, that's Kelly's spot now. Like this is life. And I think the beauty of being a musician, and especially a teacher, because as a performer, it's hard to be all about giving. Like you can say
Yep.
you are, but you're giving, but there's an ego about performing that can't
Oh,
that
yeah.
can't be really removed.
Yep.
Teaching is about developing someone else. And so for me and my teaching method, it's much more about how do you communicate? How can you be honest? How can you advocate for yourself? How can you work really hard, and applying those to other parts of their life? So in my studio, I would love to identify leaders and be
Mm.
like, dude, this kid needs help. Like, would you mind doing the next show with this kid and like, you know, teach them how to make eye
Yeah.
contact? Because, I taught all my kids how to shake hands back in the day, how to look people in the
Mm.
eyes, you know, hugging. Like those are the things that as a music teacher, we can do as a safe, trusted adult
Yep.
that people don't get anywhere else. If you're teaching adults, it's almost even better because you have people working these crazy jobs that are so stressed,
Yeah.
and a lot of my work was I would go during the day into office buildings downtown and work with executives during their lunch breaks, right?
Mm.
And you're giving them a different gift. You're giving them a gift of slowing down, learning how to breathe, how to playing through a passage slowly instead of frenetically. That all applies to the rest of the day. It's like a massage for their spirit. And
Yeah.
so that was my philosophy of business and teaching, and that's what created a community, I think.
Mm. I love that, Eric. And I think what's so I mean, gosh, of course, your brain starts going wild with like all the examples and things that I can think about my own childhood and how
Yeah.
how those have impacted me as a human being. And I say to my students all the time, and especially when they're incoming into the studio, if I'm talking to a parent for the first time, my students tend to be very high anxiety. That's what I love working with. I love to build that confidence. And as we're talking through that process, we might not need to get on stage ever. Like that might be a future thing that maybe happens as a symptom of other growth that we have. But music is a safe place to make mistakes. A lot of our students don't have that elsewhere in their life right now. If you
Mm-mm.
have a bad test, your grade tanks. If you um, make a mistake in social settings that can create some drama in life, and it can have a lot of strong repercussions. in a music lesson, if you squeak on the clarinet, no one dies. You do not get a bad grade in lessons. It is a completely safe, open environment to just exist and try new things. And I think in a lot of ways, our society now, especially with the internet and everyone being plastered everywhere, we lack that space. It's important for our students and our young people to have that environment and that separation a little bit too.
Mm, yeah, that's beautifully said. Agreed.
Do you find with some of those adult students that you're working with that are higher stress, are they coming to you for that separation, or are they at first coming to you because it's just fun? Are they that aware that it's something that they're missing in separation?
I think it depends. Like
Mm,
sometimes you're dealing with like an executive that's super intense and they're going to come in, or a surgeon. Like, dude, surgeons come in and they can start playing guitar at 50 and be really good at 54. They
yeah.
have hands, they're analytical, they will put in the time. They're really curious. And so that's one trip. They're adding this element to their life, almost like a checklist. They're like, I've always wanted to
Mm,
play guitar. And that's one form of focus. The other is, I had a student who was like, had 2 Pulitzer Prizes as a journalist. Life was very
gosh,
intense.
that's
And
awesome.
so for them, it was showing up on a Thursday and playing some blues and maybe telling some
Mm,
stories about the week. And it was not one. So that's the other great thing about music is it can be so many things.
yeah.
I was fortunate enough to grow up in a place in the bluegrass community, right? Which is like getting together and singing old songs and playing twangy banjo and guitar things, and just being connected, right? And
Yeah.
the same thing with classical music. So I think it can be so many things, and that makes a great teacher, right? Is seeing someone come in and being like, oh, this is what this person needs. Like this person needs to grind out to win a competition. This person obviously is going through something difficult in their life. They need to just chill out, right? Maybe I'm going to help them chill out by applying a lot of pressure and making them practice
Mm,
certain technical things, because I know that sometimes a really regimented discipline can switch your brain. And I
yeah.
think it's being mindful to that moment, which is what makes it exciting. I think so many teachers get burned out, right? And I think they're getting burned out because they're like, whatever, working through a method book. They're not seeing teaching for what it actually can be. And that's why I
Mm,
think like the stuff that you're doing, which is elevating this whole profession to that we're really important. You know what I mean? The people that are really important are like the people who coach my kid. I have my son is an elite basketball player. It's like so funny, guitar player and an actor. My son's a super elite basketball player. The people who mentor him are the most important people in his life, right?
yeah.
They are with him all the time. I trust them so thoroughly. And we are that too. And so I think the work that we do, if we do it well, is as important as any work there is to be done.
Mm,
Because if you've been teaching a long time and you see what your students, where they go and how they remember you, you were asking these great questions. I was thinking of how many times a year a student will, I'm sure you've had this happen, where they say, Kelly, do you remember when you said this thing, this piece of advice? You have no idea what they're talking about.
yeah.
You
No
were just like
clue.
this, we're chatting. And they're like, when you said that, that changed my life. And I applied to this school and I got the audition. And it's like, that lesson changed my life. And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad. You have no idea what they're talking about, right?
Nope.
And
Yep.
so
Oh
I
yeah.
live for those moments to be like, yeah. So I've also tried to cuss a lot less in lessons than I used to. So
They'll
makes you a
swear
little bit,
jar
a,
on the
a
studio
little,
table. Yeah,
a
yeah.
little bit more aware. Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's wild when we think about our students now and what they're growing up with and the environment that they need in that separation. The internet just puts so much more pressure on them in a very weird way, and I think there's a lot of new stresses and new anxieties that are coming up. So I think it's also really beautiful to have that space for them. It is whatever they need, and also it's an actual live body. It's not a TikTok video trying to give them what they need, or Snapchat AI, or whatever those freaky things are. I don't love that.
Why do you think that? What do you think the anxiety? Because we all see it, any like
Mm,
in the kids, and I also think kids are awesome right now. The ones I hang out with, I'm like, oh, they're also really, there's a lot of great players. There's a lot of
yeah.
kids that are really expressive, really sensitive, playing at high levels. Uh,
Yeah.
where did the anxiety piece, like, how did that
Mm.
slip in? Because I feel like that hasn't always been there.
Oh, that is such a big question. The first thing that comes to mind for me, and I think an important thing I'll just kind of acknowledge, a lot of times our ideal student is who we were as students. So when I say my students are high anxiety, I was a very high anxiety, especially when I got to high school and into college. I really struggled with that. And a lot of the
Mm,
pressure I was experiencing was completely self inflicted.
mm,
But that pressure was like, everyone's going to college and everyone is getting degrees now and everyone has these big dreams and goals. And also on the internet, we're sharing all of our accomplishments. So you're seeing what your peers are doing well, and no one is talking about what's not going well publicly. So it kind of creates
Yep.
this false sense of always being behind and never being good enough. And I think that tends to feed it. And now it's just dropping younger and younger and younger. Like I was getting that feeling in late middle school into high school. I have students now that are getting that in fourth, fifth, sixth grade. And a lot of that
Yep.
is access to internet. And they're seeing kids their age be, internet famous and be making
Yeah.
money and have like all the nice shiny things that they might think that they want. And that's creating a very weird like parasocial relationship with influencers that are not fully transparent and honest. And also it's creating these weird expectations that are completely unrealistic for what life can and should look like in our kids right now.
Yep, I think that's a really great way to say it, and I appreciate what you were saying about that, because I think there is the side. There's elements that are not awesome as far as
Yeah.
being human, and
Yep.
I experience a lot now of especially high school kids and college kids. They're like really curious about, because I grew up in the late '90s, right? And they're really interested. Like that was my experience. It was the last era before smartphones, right?
Yeah.
And that was my college experience. And they want to know what it was like. And they were,
Yeah.
and the truth is, a lot of the high school kids I hang out with now, uh, this is actually a great thing to do if you're listening to this and you teach kids, is because their parents just bitch all the time about them being on their phones all the time. Is you turn around and you say, okay, let's compare screen time. And if I
Mm,
compare screen time with most of my students, I have more screen time than they do. And
yeah.
I say, so, and I encourage you to do that to your parents too, because your
Mm,
parents are sitting there scrolling Instagram too a lot, and they're complaining about you doing it. But I see a movement of high school kids becoming mindful about it, and they're
yeah.
starting to self-regulate, right?
Mm,
And all the kids I know, I see them. Yeah, they're on it, but not as much as we are.
yeah. Yep.
So hopefully it
Oh,
continues to move in that
absolutely.
direction. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, God, I would love to see that. It is amazing too. As you're talking about the self awareness, the other thing that came to mind for me is a lot of my students. Um, I don't know if it's because information is more readily available, or maybe it's just even in our lesson environment when we're talking about music specifically. They are very aware of what's going on in the world, and so they ask very informed questions. Like they do want to know more. So even I had a student come to me recently, and she's like,
Mm.
we talked about going to the symphony concert and I was looking at like the tickets and everything. And I have a question. I'm like, okay, what can I answer? She goes, well, why is a symphony concert ticket more expensive than a Taylor Swift ticket? And I was like, oh, that's a really good question. And I said, well, can you pull up the numbers that you were comparing? And you're looking at that. And she's looking at like the base pricing, like the actual list price for a Taylor Swift ticket,
Mm-hmm.
not the $1,000 resale prices. But we had a really good conversation about like what does it take to run that organization. They own that hall often. It's not just like touring and renting spaces. Also there's a capacity issue. You're getting a lot more intimate environment. It's not tens and tens of thousands of people. We've got a couple hundred people or a couple thousand people in that hall. We had a really good conversation around that. But she was genuinely curious, not from a point of judgment like I don't think this is worth the money, but she was looking at it like I was looking at tickets because I was curious. We had talked about this concert and it didn't make sense to me. Like why is this different? I kind of
Mm.
expected like a concert ticket is a concert ticket and they're all going to be, $49 or something. And that was a really interesting conversation to have. They are very aware. And I think that's
Yeah.
a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I was at a violin competition, like a regional Seattle violin competition a couple weeks ago, and hanging out in the high school where there's kids practicing everywhere. And I was listening to
Hmm.
I was so into it and hearing their conversations and just hearing them play. And I was like, these kids are shredding and they're playing so
Yeah.
well. And they're like, how did your, they're really asking great questions to each other about how they
Hmm.
did. And yeah, there's so many sides to it, and kids are
Yeah.
always going to be awesome.
Oh yeah. God, I love working with kids. They're just so I don't know, they're unpredictable in a really wonderful way. That every single day looks different, and that's different than adults. I do enjoy that a lot. We all try to maintain the status quo a little too much.
Yeah, and I think that both you and I, we spend a lot of our waking hours talking about how to elevate this business, right?
Yeah,
You're teaching,
yeah,
we're trying to give musicians confidence and a skill set or
yeah,
tools to be business minded. But the reality, like, listen to where our conversation's going. The reality is that we really both know that if you're doing this mindfully, if you are really into it, if you're investing in these kids, if you're giving them an authentic experience, the real message is you can charge whatever you want. If you can
Mm-hmm.
connect with one kid in a meaningful way, the right kid that's going to tell everybody, and you enjoy doing it, and it's all, you can, whatever you decide to charge or how you decide to charge or how you bill, whatever it is, it doesn't matter because parents have to have you because you are providing something they don't know how to
Yeah.
get,
Yep.
right? You're bringing them back. You're bringing them into reality. You're whatever the parent thinks they're spending time off the phone, whatever that thing is, we're the only people that do it. I mean, sport,
Yeah.
as I'm learning about sports, great sport, because I didn't grow up with that. But my best friend was a professional athlete, as I was saying, and you learn that's the same thing. That's where
Yep.
they're artists too, of help. And as we actually have a lot of data on this now, where this is going in 10 years, uh, as as we're becoming more digitized, they're turning to these things. They're focusing on, school debate teams are really blowing up now, right? Because
Mm.
it's a thing. Debates big, music big, art huge, and people that are mentors for this, that are catalysts for it. I mean, I truly believe they're going to become. I mean, and throughout a lot of history, the philosophers and the people that were thinkers mattered, and as
Yep.
where we are in our culture, we really need that. And so you can focus on the bottom quarter and where that's going, which isn't awesome, or you can really work on the middle and bring those people further into culture. So I think it's a really exciting time to do what we do.
Mm. I agree. I agree. I'm curious when we talk about elevating the profession, what are some things that you learned in your private teaching journey, especially as you started Fonz and you were working on making the studio more of that business model and not just serving where it felt right for you and kind of following your gut there. But when you had more of a structure around it, what were some things that you learned that you wish more of the teachers that you were talking to or that you worked with also had ingrained in their brains or understood better?
Hmm. That's a great question. There's a very few, and they're very pointed. I think
Mm.
I've realized more of them by becoming a parent than I did than from running a company.
Yeah.
Uh, and all because the operations, the analysis of how we do automating payments or not, all those things, they're really secondary, right?
Mm.
The important thing is that the parents don't really care. Your student doesn't care. If you're awesome, they don't care.
Yep.
So you can make your choices. The other thing is that people will pay you much more than you think they will. Most musicians come out with this sense of value that's so low.
Yep.
And I know it's been like that forever. I learned it. My path of learning that lesson was multi tiered. But
Mm.
I tell this story all the time. When I was teaching in 2006, my daughter was about to be born. I was either going to go to med school or, excuse me, to law school, or I was going to go do something else. And one of my students talked me into doubling my rates. And that was when I did that in 2006. I did it as a Hail Mary, and no one cared. No one, they were all like, "Oh, I'm glad you finally did this. That makes way more sense since you're having a kid." And then I raised my rates a lot more again. And then I had the only thing that occurred out of that is I got a huge waiting list,
Mm.
right? And so that I was fortunate to learn that early. So valuing ourselves, valuing the quality of our work, and like having that confidence. Because when I go into the world, I still present myself as a music teacher with great pride. And and when I meet somebody on the side of a basketball court, before I tell them that I'm an executive at Make Music and that I've started a startup that got acquired, I'm like, I'm a guitar teacher. That's what I've always done. That's where I connect with people, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't need those. I know that that's who I am. So, and I want to carry that confidently,
Mm.
and I want to keep doing it. I think that's what keeps people from burning out. The last thing is that being broke sucks. I learned that, and it's ridiculous. I was broke for a long time as a music teacher because I thought I was supposed to be, because that's what my music teachers did. That's
Mm.
so lame. And I thought, oh, well, I get a professorship. I got a professorship and I hated it. I lasted like one semester. I was like, this is terrible. There's no freedom. I didn't like the bureaucracy. I didn't care about the money. I was like, this sucks. I didn't want to do that. But the difference between living near poverty as an artist, as an actor and a guitar player is supposed to
Mm.
be, and being like, oh, I can do whatever I want to financially. I'm still like, I don't need to have a lavish life. but I can eat good food and I can not worry about paying my rent or my mortgage and I can go see shows. It's way better. Right. And so, unless you're trying to like Kurt Cobain it, some kind of super emotional music where it's going to end up at, that's your trip. But as a musician, we can really do better. And I think that
Mm.
there's no reason to not make a great living, but you have to do it yourself. Right. Which is why many people need to talk to somebody like you to be
Mm.
like, oh, you can do this. And then hopefully those pass down. And the last piece of that is I realized my last guitar teacher, who was maybe the greatest guitar teacher I've ever had, by 2008, I was charging twice as much as he was. I was sending him referrals every week because people called me first because they assumed I was better. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, I got to tell you, if you can get in with this dude, get in with this dude because he's the best. And then they'd ask me like, but you're twice as much. I'd be like, I know, it's weird. That's why you called me. But it's just, the basic fundamental of perceived value.
Mm-hmm. That is one that I think so many of us are missing, and I think that's something that gets passed down. It's almost like generational trauma, to be honest, amongst musicians. Like we watch our teachers not charge enough, and therefore we also don't charge enough. I talked to someone just this week, and they said I just moved back to the area where my teacher is still actively teaching, and they're with the university, and their rate is, I think it's like $50 an hour. I said, well, yeah, they don't need the money. They have a full-time job. They're comfortable financially. What is the incentive for them to raise their rates? They have none. They teach a few additional students on the side, and it's super chill for them. There's not that pressure. Of course, they're going to keep the rate low. Now, should they be doing that? No. It absolutely holds everybody else into a ridiculously low standard. It sets very weird precedent, and I don't love that. And at the same time, their rate does not control yours. They're completely unrelated. It doesn't need to be like, yes, there can be market rates, and that's something we do a lot of research on, and we have a lot of data on to help place those things. But if we say your market rate is $85 an hour and the teacher down the street is charging 50, that's not your responsibility. It doesn't need to be a factor in your decision-making process. But it is something that gets passed down, is that we're supposed to be broke in a very frustrating way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not how it needs to be. And
No.
hopefully everybody will start to figure that out, that it doesn't do anybody a service. And that the other thing that we know dead certain is that there's still a shortage of music teachers,
Yes.
right? So I might charge twice as much as somebody else. I can't, I will get more phone calls because I know that principle, that this is how this works, that most people will value what I do by how I value myself, how I carry
Yep.
myself. If I talk to you and your kid about guitar for 5 minutes, I'm so stoked about it. They don't like, the last thing they care about is how much I charge, unless they don't like me, unless we're
Yeah.
not a good fit. But
And then
they are
that's fine.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, that's totally cool. But if we connect, once I connect with a kid or a student, whoever that is, that conversation is secondary.
Yeah.
And the people, if you're listening and you're thinking about, oh my gosh, I mean, you just go big, right? If you've been teaching for a while, you can really explore that. And you start to notice these things. Is you say, I'm $120 for a 45-minute lesson. Could be in an urban area, that's fine. You say that and you can see it in a family right away that they're going to try to pay you if they can't afford it. Because the really cool people will be like, oh, I value the work he's doing. And they're going to try. And you have to often say to them, but I do have a sliding scale. If you need it, be sure to ask about it.
Yeah.
And because most people won't say anything, but you start to see these hints because your awesome people are going to try to pay you. They're like, oh my gosh, yeah, Kelly's worth it. Well, let's try to make it work and let's see if we can make this happen. And the beautiful side is when it becomes on you to be like, oh, we do have a scholarship or we'd have a sliding scale, just so you know. And that's when you know you're in a really great place with your work.
Absolutely. I think a lot of times musicians look at it and say, well, I couldn't afford that rate myself, so I don't feel comfortable charging that, which is such a backwards way of getting there too. You're not your own ideal student. You're not your own client. That's not the point. And also, if you're charging more, people are paying you more, then you can't afford that rate, right? Like it doesn't need to be this like chicken and egg thing. Just charge the rate that people are willing to pay. When I was in high school, the local symphony player that I wanted to study with was charging more than twice what my previous teacher was charging. At that time, it was about $100 an hour, which, 15 or so years ago, that was a lot of money. And it was a big one. So I, in high school, went and got a job at the local music store so I could pay my own lesson tuition. And I knew how much I had to work to I had my exact schedule and old boss, they were just absolutely fabulous. They would make sure I got the right number of hours every single pay cycle so I could pay my lessons, I could pay my gas to get down there, and a little snack on the way every single week. It was amazing. And I wrote all my own checks. I valued it that much. I wanted to be studying with him so badly. I would have done anything. I would have done anything to work with him because I respected him so much. And I'm not saying that I expect it of my students. Like, that is not the position that I want to put them in, obviously. But I will go above and beyond to support them because I've been there. And if they feel that way about me, then oh my gosh, of course, like we will make it work. Of course, we can do something to help and to fix things and to make it more
That's an
manageable for them.
amazing story that you did
Thank
that in
you.
high school. That's
I
pretty
think
epic.
I think it was like February of my senior year. I've definitely told this story in the podcast before, but I think it was like February of my senior year. And Todd looked at me and said, "Do you have parents? Like, what is your deal? Like, you write your own checks and you drive yourself down here, and I've never met them, and it's really weird. Like,
It is
what
really
is your
weird.
situation?" And I was like, "Nope, I just really wanted to be here, and this is how I'm making it work." Because my previous teacher, I was the babysitter. Like, I would exchange lessons and babysit and try to,
Mm-hmm.
kind of exchange services there, kind of the same thing that you were doing with your students. And so I had to make it work somewhere else. So I went and got a job and figured out how to sell clarinets.
That's incredible.
Oh man. I wanted to talk a little bit in the transition period as kind of a maybe bow on the conversation today. You've had some really amazing transition in your career in the last year or two. So funds obviously grew and it was acquired. Tell me about that process, because that is so exciting and wild and probably not at all what you were picturing when you first started this.
Yeah. So last year, Fonz was acquired by a company. Make Music is probably what people that are listening to know. They own brands such as Alfred Publishing, which does all
Yep.
of Suzuki, and yeah, one of the oldest publishers out there. They own Finale. They own Make Music Cloud. Now they own Fonz. They're part of a bigger company called Peaksware, and Peaksware they have a sports side too. And this is what's really interesting. It's my life trajectory. Is they own a company called Training Peaks, Training Heroic, and these are
Mm,
apps that coaches use, right? To where they have their plans. If you want to say go, if you're a Tour de France team, or if you're going to climb Mount Everest or something, you use these apps to get coaching, and they're really very successful. So this parent company, Peaksware, they've been on our radar forever. Originally, I kind of thought that Fonz's place as an acquisition target might be like Intuit, because they didn't have a
mm,
scheduling and payments thing yet.
yeah.
And if you look in our space, Acuity, which was a really cool product, I'm sure many of you have
Yep.
heard of it. It was started by a massage therapist for a guy's mom was a massage therapist. Started with
Mm,
really good roots. They got acquired by Squarespace. But I was also really mindful that once an acquisition happens, usually a company, they really change because they're maybe owned by a PE or a private equity firm.
yeah.
They're focusing on different things. I knew that music brands that um, their mantra was based. The entire company is based on this book called Peak. Have you heard of this book called Peak? Which you
I
haven't read it.
haven't.
It's by Anders. I'm forgetting his last name, but it's a good one to put on your radar. It's about the idea of the science of deliberate practice,
Okay.
right? And so that's where Fonz fits into this thing,
Hmm.
which is they're centered around the idea of deliberate practice as a learning mechanism.
Hmm.
And so I was really intrigued by that. And they became interested in Fonz. And Fonz had started as for music teachers, and we had branched out into personal trainers, yoga teachers, yoga studios, and we were really becoming what's called different verticals, right? And uh, all these different verticals started using us. Dog trainers, a bunch of dog trainers were using us, and that was cool and all, but it was so exciting that this was allows us to come back to music, which is that's where my
Mm,
heart was. And so they were really focused on our vision and our mission, and the future of how Fonz could fit into all these things, right? These are a lot of old brands, and Fonz is a really new brand and doing really cool stuff, and we have a really technical team that can do really cool things. So my experience has been amazing. I've never had a job in my life. I've never had
mm,
like a normal job. And so when they acquired Fonz, I became the vice president of basically business development for private markets, meaning I'm in charge of the landscape of helping private music teachers and private music schools develop, right? Which is what I've been doing at Fonz anyway. So I still run Fonz too, but I'm also communicating a lot and working a lot with the other brands and the other brand
mm.
leaders. And so we were acquired like December 31st of 2022. So in this first year, I've learned so much. And I'm always very aware of where my weaknesses are. And so as a leader, there's certain areas I'm really good at. And one of the areas I was really poor, we talked about this for the podcast, was the finance side. And my boss now is incredible at finance. He was I think a McKinsey consultant before he did a startup and came into this scene. So I've learned a ton, and
Mm.
the transition is awesome. But the vision of Fonts has actually become more focused because now I've got more resources to go out and share this mission, and I can reach more people, and we can build partnerships. And so it's actually been a I mean, the product is way better than it was a year ago, right? And we're using really uh, modern development techniques and engineering
Mm.
techniques, and how we're focused on the customers. We're able to give a lot back to them too, because we're able to give them new ideas and be like, oh, this is a really cool concept to build more quickly. Or
Mm.
so I'm feeling it's been really great. I mean, I hope they're happy too. I've been delighted, and it's kind of exceeded what I thought the experience would be like.
Mm.
And the other reality is really important if you're ever thinking about starting a company, is that you have to be a workaholic. Like if you're gonna start a company and you're gonna go big with it, I've always, like I said, with practicing, you have to love to work, and you have to be working towards something. Raising money and building a startup, like when someone says, oh, I've got an idea for an app, it is so hard. Like I didn't sleep for 7 years. I have a bookshelf of business books that I read. I was it was so intense. And then you start getting investors, and you're putting millions of dollars into these things to build them. And
Yeah.
those people, you have to write them a letter every quarter to tell them how you're doing. And man, I was so stressed because I was going to have to, you have to growing is raising money. That is the reality of it. And it's an
Yeah.
addiction. Startups are like nothing else you've ever done. And so I encourage everyone to try it if they think it's a great idea. But wow, it's so intense. So the reason I mentioned that, and then I'll stop, is that I'm still working just as much. I'm just as motivated. I'm still, but my stress is so much lower because I have support, right?
Mm.
Meaning I'm beholden to a different set of people, and we're
Mm-hmm.
all in it together, than it was being raising money and being just me trying to build these teams and hire people. So I'm so grateful to be part of an organization now
Mm.
that really is on board for the mission. So it's a long answer, but it's a great question, and it's been a wild ride.
Yeah. Wow, that's just a crazy couple years. And what's so cool about the story, and it, when we heard about the acquisition pretty shortly after we were at NAM, and I ran into Ron, and he was so excited about it because it is such a good fit in that industry. Like this perfect marriage of your passion, which is so evident. I mean, through everything we're talking about today, like teaching, supporting teachers, and building out the product is clearly your mission, your passion. And to have a brand like Make Music that shares in that. And a lot of these other big music companies not only value their business and their customers, but supporting each other. I mean, it really is this beautiful, beautiful community to be a part of. And to see that come together and then see what you guys are turning out in new development and stuff, it's been really exciting. I mean, you've announced new features. I think like last week there was something about camps and workshops. So you guys are cooking, which has got to feel
Yeah,
really good too.
it does. And I think you said the most important thing. And like, you said it all in your story about your lessons in high school, that I can't really get over that.
Hmm.
But it's like, man, that's not lame. And like, that's the thing that I teach kids. I'm like, what you're describing there is not being lame. That is being engaged at any age. Like
Yeah.
I will get a job. I will write the checks. It doesn't matter what you're doing, whatever you're curious or interested enough to do. It's so cool. And that's what you're teaching kids, right?
Hmm.
That's the thing that we're doing. And it doesn't matter if you're building a company. Like I built a company because I love guitar playing, right? I love
Yeah.
teaching kids. I wanted to facilitate that business thing. You believe in the culture of teaching too. And you're trying to help music teachers do this thing. And I guess there's so much lameness out there, and
Yeah.
people can sense it so much. And if you're
Yeah.
really, you know, telling those stories like you're telling, that they're so inspirational. And because that's the one thing I really struggle with people. It's a
Hmm.
hard thing for me. I'm like, we're in this one little life together, and I have a really difficult time connecting with people that aren't interested in doing anything. And
Yeah.
I'm like, that's just like when that's that's kind of a stopper for me. And with most people, when you talk to them, you can find their thing that lights them up. But if you can't, I'm like, how can you, I'm sure there's something going on, but how can you not be like engaging in some way where you could fail big or try big or contribute big?
Yeah.
Yeah. So your story just really kind of resonated with me about that.
Mm, thank you. It makes me feel good to hear that. And also, I was thinking, speaking of things resonating, I was thinking about your partnership with your wife and how you guys are talking about this like parallel between her passion and then your best friend being an athlete. And I'm thinking, you know, my husband is a professional sailor and how we kind of had that same, connection of it was just passion. Like I didn't know a whole lot about sailing when we first met, but I know a lot more than I ever thought I would know about sailing now. And at the same time, like it is that genuine passion that attracts you to people that you want to work with, that you want to run a company with, like with you and your wife, and the studio was growing. And it's so exciting to have those friends and those relationships and people around you that care so much about the things that you care about, or care a similar amount about things also that maybe you don't know anything about. And that passion is what brings it all together and makes it feel worthwhile, and it makes life way more exciting. And I think the reason this is all so exciting for me in this exact moment is so many of the musicians that you and I talk to define themselves as a musician first, even before a music teacher, and they would never define themselves as a business owner. They would never say the word entrepreneur. And it's frustrating for me because I think every musician is an entrepreneur. Like that is the entire gig, is finding our way through life without a prescription. There's no one way to have a music career, which is why we're doing this whole silly podcast. At the same time, most musicians just see themselves as that musician still in the practice room, still in college, just toiling away on their craft, and they can't step into that version of themselves where they can confidently charge the rates that they deserve, and have a policy that serves them, and is using, investing in a little bit of money in every month in technology that can run their business for them and actually edify them in that way. And I have those conversations on a weekly basis, and it really comes down to being open to being like musician plus, like just a little bit more, like a slightly different version of you as your solely performance self, and being open to some of the opportunities that exist for you as a musician or someone who just has a general passion for music and life.
I love it. It's so close, right?
Yeah.
And you're right, because and I think about this all the time too. It's like, is it like I'm a guitarist. I'm not a guitar teacher. Is it sexy to you to act like you don't care that I'm flippant about money, that I'm above money?
Mm.
You think, and I think that might be part of a culture. I'm an artist. You want to perceive
Yep.
like you have, or present as if you have like a trust fund, or like, patrons
Yeah.
or things like,
Yeah.
but the reality is people respect you more when you present your worth and you're confident about it. And you're like, this is what I need. I'm not being greedy. I'm trying to build myself up so I can be more, so I can give back more. And I think this is a great shift in thinking, is that if you start looking at, I'm trying to accumulate, I'm trying to build wealth. I'm trying to make real money as a musician. And in order to do that, I have got to be a business owner. The best money you can invest is get yourself a coach. I mean, I'm sorry, but like music schools aren't doing it. You find somebody
Mm-hmm.
that's going to put you on a path. It will pay for itself 10 times over, but do it with the mentality of, if I used to have, there was a long time I had this vision. I was like, would it be crazy? And I was talking to Allison. I was like, hear me out. I was like, let's just say I bought a Ferrari, right? Okay, hear me out. And let's say that I bought it so I could take my students to school on their birthday. And Allison's like, nice try. I was like, I'm telling you, that's what gave me the idea. I was like, how cool would that be if I was like, hey, Paul, I'm taking you to school on your birthday, and show up in the Ferrari. She's like, no. I was like, dang it. But the longer I live, the more I think that the idea behind that is actually interesting, which is that if we're trying to create something out of ourselves, for instance, having one of the things that really helped me connect with students is I love tennis shoes like kids love tennis shoes. I have cool shoes.
Oh yeah.
I will spend money on Jordans or shoes that I like, and my kids and I will talk about them. I use them to connect. It's something we share. And so I think that these ideas of seeing yourself, whatever you think awesome is, and working towards that. I love that you mentioned how your husband is a sailor. One of my former students is like a world champion Thunderbird sailor now. And so,
Oh my
um,
gosh.
that's his trip. And so,
That's so
sailed for
cool.
USC, got a full ride there. So So I know I have some insight about how interesting that is and how that
Yeah.
applies to music. He's doing something that people find interesting. He's choosing
Yeah.
a life that's interesting. Anybody can connect to that. As a musician, I have a million questions about precision and decision making and how you practice, how you spend your time. They all relate,
Yeah.
and I think,
Yep.
and it doesn't matter what discipline it's in, or what you're doing. And we're getting at is do great work, be awesome, and then be confident about it, and everything sorts itself out.
Yep. And sometimes it takes a little fake it till you make it. There's a great TED talk on that from Amy Cuddy that I highly
Mm,
recommend, that sometimes we just have to lean into it and portray the confidence before it actually catches up with us. But you
hmm
were talking about the energy mismatch before. There's a great creator on TikTok, and I think her name is Whitney. I want to say it's Uland, Uland. Don't quote me on that. It might be a little inaccurate, but her entire premise is like you have to have celebrity energy. Like basically you have to not give an F about what anyone thinks of you and do it anyway because you're so passionate about it and you're so excited. And when you show up and it's obvious that you care that much, people can tell. And you can also at the same time watch videos on TikTok or on Instagram, and you can see the people that are talking, and it might be good information, but they're a little dead behind the eyes. They
hmm
clearly are not engaged in what they're doing in that moment. And when you see those videos, you just scroll. The same thing is happening in your lessons. The same thing is happening in your performances. The same thing is happening in running your business. If you're not approaching it with confidence and with like verve and all that passion that you have, whether you can tell or not, she calls it like energy BO. You might not know you stink, but everybody around you can definitely tell that something's off.
Oh my gosh, I'm definitely borrowing that. That's amazing.
She's awesome. Her
Yeah, you
content's
can't
really
fake it.
entertaining. I like it. Yeah.
You can't fake it. And those connections and those, and genuinely caring and trying to do great things. I mean, it's really fun, and
Yeah.
it's infectious.
Yeah.
Other people start to feel like they can do it too.
Mm. I agree. I agree. Eric, this has been a ton of fun. I think we could
Total
probably go on
blast.
for this for like two more whole episodes, but at a certain point we have to put a pin in it. But I really, really appreciate you sharing the journey and what it's looked like even the last couple of years for you. Cause again, it sounds like it's been a wild ride, and also very excited for you and the entire team at Make Music and what you've got going on. Thank you for sharing your journey. This is awesome.
Oh, it has been awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a great time.